We've heard about the State of the Union, but what about the state of the presidency? Abortion is back on the front burner, and it isn't pretty. And the president throws it down about socialism. All this and more on this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback.
Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
We heard a lot about the State of the Union this week, a rip-roaring economy, time to pull back on fighting wars all over the world, and an upcoming summit with North Korea. But what about the office of the presidency and the man himself? What is the state of the presidency regarding perhaps the most controversial man to occupy the Oval Office in a very long time? Has he grown into the job? Is he prepared to continue the fight? Is his presidential stock, so to speak, going up or down? Joining me now to answer that question is Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa.
So last night, it seemed like the President of the United States kind of hit his stride. He seemed to command his audience. What was your take on that speech?
Yes, I agree. I think it was, he seemed to, as I wrote today in Liberty Nation, actually, he seems to have grown into his office. I can't really put my finger on the exact difference between this year and last year, but he certainly seemed more, commanding, more relaxed, more confident, even, if you like. If it's possible to say that Donald Trump has ever seemed not confident, but I definitely think he seemed to have grown into the role of president, if you like.
It's interesting that he sort of hit his stride, and the Democrats, let's just say there was something conciliatory about last night. It seemed like the Democrats weren't all sort of to make Trump look bad at every turn. There seemed something conciliatory, I noticed. Did you?
Yes, I definitely felt that. I think it was such a strong speech, and I think it hit so many notes that, under any normal presidency, for want of a better term, there were so many things that Trump said that even the Democrats really couldn't argue with, because there are a lot of the things that in the past their party has supported. I do notice that today, last night and today, it's interesting that the establishment media, the left-leaning media, is absolutely in hysterics trying to pull this speech apart and criticize him. But in terms of the Democrats themselves, I think it really is very difficult for them to come out with any major objections to the substance of his speech.
Right. They're obviously not coming out swinging, but despite all the backdrop of the special counsel, would you say that Mr. Trump is sounding more focused and able to sort of thin out the noise?
Yes, I really do. And, I think it's the way that the Mueller investigation is progressing, actually. And I think it really comes down to the fact that there is a sense that investigation is, it may not be ending, within the coming weeks, but that it is definitely kind of, it's past its peak of frenzy, if you like. And it's coming down gradually, maybe slowly, but gradually winding down. And I think for that reason, the president feels, I think, less distracted by it, maybe less irritated by it. And I believe that he feels that he is a little freer to focus on his agenda rather than fretting about the investigation, which I believe he probably went through a period where he was doing quite a lot of.
Yeah, you make a good point. And it seems to me that the Dems are taking him a little bit more seriously than they did at first. I mean, at first they tried the business of, he's crazy and he's sort of, not all mentally there. Then they tried everything, every which way but loose. But they seem to indicate that what he has done in some areas has made some sense.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for them to rationally argue that that is not the case. And I also think perhaps that now even though we're something like, I don't know, 19, 20 months out from the next general election, the Democratic field is already taken shape to an extent. And I almost think that the Democrats are starting to look now more towards 2020, and perhaps they are realizing that the hysterical and irrational accusations and finger pointing that they've been doing since Trump took office, basically, is not really seeming to work out for them very well, despite their success in the midterms. They do better when they talk about policies. For instance, talking about healthcare was one of the things that really brought them that success in the midterms. And I think they're realizing that the more that they scream and shout about Trump being a white supremacist and being crazy and unfit for office and all the rest of it is not really getting them a lot of traction. And I think now they're thinking about 2020 and they're thinking, well, perhaps we have to focus maybe a little more on the issues now.
Well, you could be right. They seem to be tacking a different direction. And part of it is that the approval ratings that came out this week, just off the street, they were just enormous, about 75%. The legacy media can play their fact-checking and all their nonsense, but I think the people pretty much had their say when they gave such high approval ratings to the State of the Union message.
Yeah, it really was. Actually, I was looking at the CBS News poll, and according to that poll, about 3/4 of the people who watched the State of the Union address approved of Trump's message. And I think specifically when it came down to the immigration thing, I believe it was something like 72% perhaps agreed with Trump's remarks on immigration, and about 70 or 71%, I think it was, agreed with his assertion that there is indeed a crisis on the southern border. And only about 24% of the people polled said they disapproved of the speech. So that's hard to argue. That's hard to even for the Democrats. It's hard to ignore numbers like that.
Indeed, it is. Thank you so much for joining us today on Truth is Making a Comeback. Graham J. Noble, Chief Political Correspondent. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Lisa.
With Democrats taking the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives and the legislatures of several states in 2018, a slurry of abortion bills have been introduced across the country. Democrats are trying to ram through their abortion rights protection bills, even as Republicans bring in their own heartbeat bills and the like, with it looking more each day as if Ruth Bader Ginsburg will be replaced in President Trump's first term. Democrats nationwide scramble to codify abortion as a right in state laws before Trump can stack the Supreme Court in his favor and possibly overturn Roe v. Wade. New York passed new abortion protections recently, reducing the restrictions against late-term abortions, then celebrated by lighting up bridges and monuments in pink. Virginia Democrats tried to follow suit and only narrowly failed. The pro-life movement reacted in outrage, claiming these bills allow abortions as late as 1 minute before birth, or in some cases, even immediately after birth. Proponents of these bills, however, call it fake news. Joining me now is Editor-at-Large James Fight. Jim, it looks like a beautiful day out in the wilds of Arkansas.
It is nice. It's up towards 70 degrees in February, so no complaints.
All right, so abortion seems to be back on the front burner. The question is, who's lying? Do these bills actually allow abortions at the last month before birth or even immediately after?
Well, neither side is completely fabricating their story, but there's a little hyperbole on both sides. There are some claims from the anti-abortion folks who say that, these bills will allow abortion up to the very moment before birth. And what that really stems from is Representative Kathy Tran from Virginia. She actually said in in committee, she said that in her bill there was no limit, and so she answered yes to the question of whether or not when a woman began dilating, if an abortion could still happen. Of course, the rebuttal to that is the very moment before birth, you're either in delivery or you're in the middle of a C-section already. So there's some word games on both sides, but the truth of the matter is this does allow late-term abortions, all the way up into the point right before birth begins, and not, despite what the Virginia governor goofed and said, not actually after birth.
So these folks claim that these bills ease restrictions that can risk lives. Can allowing more late-term abortions actually save lives? I mean, give me your take on this.
Well, I've heard from several OB/GYNs who've weighed in via social media, saying that there is no instance in the third trimester that actually necessitates an abortion. Delivery, perhaps, but not an abortion. We're talking about a stage of development where if the baby has a chance to live, it can live in or out of the womb in NICU.
But what about those that aren't expected to survive birth anyway, Jim?
Sometimes, it sounds horrible to say, but sometimes babies die. There are complications, and sometimes, no matter how hard you try, they don't make it. That's really no different from anyone else. If I were in a car accident or a small child were in a car accident, maybe we'll survive, maybe we won't, and it won't be the doctor's fault if they do everything they can and the victim doesn't make it. Saying that, well, we should have an abortion because the baby's probably not going to live anyways. It's like saying that, hey, let's not even bother trying to keep this person alive who's had this car accident because, well, their chances aren't good anyways. And the doctors aren't always right. There are cases where infants who are given no chance of survival are born and live, and other times they don't. My mother actually knows a couple who had a child, and they were told that their child, by the way, was born with only half a heart. And they were told that it would be a miracle if that baby lived 3 hours after birth, and they were actually advised to abort. They refused, of course, and that baby celebrated its second birthday in December. I've actually seen video of the first time little baby Nixon got to go home, and just the idea of the car seat cracked him up. He was just laughing. It was great. You can't ever say this baby is 100% going to die. And if it's already dead, well, that's not abortion now, is it?
Jim, finally, I guess I'm perplexed as to why this is, coming up now. I mean, abortion seemed to be an issue that, well, I won't say that it was settled, but it wasn't very much in the news until recently. Now, what fueled New York and Virginia, in your opinion?
I think two things, really. One, the Democrats winning majorities in the U.S. House of Representatives and in legislatures in several states, for one thing, kind of gave them the power to really start pushing these bills. But also the risk, if you will, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg will have to be replaced during Donald Trump's first term. It has progressives in sort of a panic that, oh no, we have to get these abortion protections passed now because one more conservative and they'll overturn Roe v. Wade. As to whether or not that would actually happen, only time will tell.
Now, this is such a ghoulish topic, really, but I did want to end on a high note. Talk to us a little bit about Idaho.
Oh, yes. In Idaho, they have introduced a bill. It hasn't made it through the legislature yet, but they introduced a bill that would actually remove the exception for abortion from the homicide laws. Idaho has, in its state legislature, unborn children defined as persons for all intents and purposes, for all of the rights that people have. The only way that they differ there is that there is that little exception that if a doctor performs an abortion, it's not murder. This bill would remove that, completely banning abortion in the state of Idaho. Now, that sounds like something that would go against Roe v. Wade, but with the massive Republican majority in both the House and the Senate in Idaho, and a pro-life governor, it looks like it's almost certain to pass. How long it'll live, we'll see.
Jim, thanks so much for joining us. You always keep a close eye on the topic of abortion. You have many articles on LibertyNation.com. Keep up the good work, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
And kiss those beautiful babies of yours.
I will.
Bye.
Bye.
In his State of the Union speech, President Trump called out the creeping socialism of the Democratic Party. He said America was founded on liberty and independence and not on government coercion, domination, and control, and that Americans are born free and we will stay free. The president declared that America will never be a socialist country. For the liberty-minded, it was a breath of fresh air, but for the Dems, the president was once again in their face. Joining me now is Chief Political Columnist for Liberty Nation, Tim Donner, my better half, and I must say, a brilliant political analyst. Welcome to Truth is Making a Comeback, Tim.
Thank you, Lise. You flatter me.
So the president, in this week's State of the Union, talked about the S word, socialism. It does seem like socialism is on the forefront. Do you think the Democrats were expecting this? What do you think brought it up to Trump's mind? Do you think everything that's going on with Venezuela?
Well, I think it's clear by their reactions that the Democrats were taken aback by the president's loud denunciation of socialism. Yes, he certainly did apply it to Venezuela, one of the richest, if not the richest country in South America, blessed with more oil reserves than practically any country in the world, and yet they've descended into a state of anarchy and poverty and violence, with millions fleeing the country. And I think he's using, the president is, this example of what can happen with unchecked socialism. So it was very deliberate, and I think we're going to hear a lot more of the S word in the months ahead.
So are you essentially saying this is a teachable moment?
Well, indeed it is. I don't know if it is for the Democratic Party, but it is for the people of the United States, who are going to have to weigh the radical proposals being advanced by the upper tier of Democratic candidates like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, who are promoting things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal, which are, full-on socialist policies, to be honest, where the government would seize control of entire industries and change the entire way that commerce, industry, and banking are done in America.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Democrats seem to be promoting, it's not just AOC. There are a lot of Democrats promoting a lot of different socialist type agendas. And do you think it started with Bernie and it's just kind of rolled downhill from there?
Well, I think Bernie advanced a sort of leftist style of populism while Trump was advancing a conservative populism. Certainly the staggering number of donations that Bernie Sanders received during the 2016 campaign was remarkable. And I think it did set the stage for people being given permission to be openly socialist, which is something that has not flown in the United States really forever, but certainly since the era of Ronald Reagan.
Now, do you think the Democrats can actually win the presidency in 2020 with this kind of progressive/socialist agenda?
It's hard to imagine that they could, honestly. Many of these ideas that were actually tamer versions of the same ideas were repudiated in 2016. Now, you could argue that Hillary Clinton lost because of Hillary and not her ideas, but that's an unsettled debate. America has always been a center-right nation, and it's hard to imagine that they would embrace a flagrantly socialist agenda when Barack Obama won in 2008 and then again in 2012, he diluted his progressivism enough to make it acceptable to a broad mass of American voters.
Well, I think honestly it was a breath of fresh air for liberty-minded individuals to hear the president really hammer down on freedom, liberty, and none of the socialist agenda. So, can you give us your final thoughts?
Well, I think it's clear that the president was laying the groundwork for his 2020 presidential campaign and drawing as stark a contrast as possible between his policies, which have created a booming American economy, record number of jobs, record low unemployment for blacks and Hispanics and women, with the promises of massive government takeovers of the healthcare industry, the energy industry, and beyond. The contrast is stark, and I honestly don't see any way that Democrats embracing such an aggressive progressive agenda are going to beat this president, especially if, as has famously been said in the past about presidential elections, it's the economy, stupid. And Trump has the economy certainly working in his favor.
Well, thank you very much. That's Tim Donner, Chief Political Columnist for LibertyNation.com. Thanks for joining us. Tim and I won't gloat that it's 80 degrees and sunny today. Can't
I
wait
think
to
you
see
did
it.
just gloat, but thank you, Lisa.
Bye. And now for this week's parting shot. Anyone even remotely tuned into politics understands that Democrats like all things collective. This practice of groupthink appears to include their clothing. And nowhere was this more apparent than during the 2019 State of the Union address. The State of the Union is the ultimate in political theater, and the optics at this year's presidential speech serve to demonstrate who are the liberty-minded, self-assured feminists and who are simply conformists who want, or perhaps need, to fit in with the crowd. If the point of feminism is to liberate and emancipate, then it is the Dems who may need a lesson in manumission, and Mrs. Trump is just the person to do it. As a former fashion model, Melania Trump is adept at utilizing her clothes to speak volumes, and in fact is a master at using it to her benefit. In 2017, the Democratic Women's Working Group asked their ladies to dress in white for the State of the Union, and so, like good little Democratic Stepford wives, they showed up looking for all the world, like nurses from the 1960s minus the hair caps. So what did Melania wear in 2017? Why, all black, of course. This was a sartorial statement that says, quote, "I am not like you and I am my own woman." Then in 2018, the Democratic women wore black in honor of the Me Too movement. Yes, it was like viewing a funeral cortege of great consequence. If the movie Steel Magnolias is correct, and, quote, "The only thing that separates us from the animals is our ability to accessorize," then all the Dems needed was a corpse to complete their ensemble. 3 guesses what Melania wore in 2018 to counter the Dems? Why, all white from top to bottom. The First Lady's spokesman, Stephanie Grisham, observed, quote, "She does not concern herself with what others think about her fashion and always stays true to herself." So this week you may have noticed that the Stepford wives went back to wearing white again. Thus it came as no surprise that when all heads turned for the FLOTUS grand entrance, she was wearing, guess, navy blue with a military-style flair. Ivanka, meanwhile, went with the black route, with a conservative patent leather belted suit coupled with glam makeup. Neither woman looked like they had plans to conform to any dress code. While the Democrats are collectively supporting the suffragettes, it does seem like the authentic feminist in the crowd, the one willing to march to the beat of her own drummer, is Mrs. Trump. She repeatedly demonstrates an alacritous ability to be her own woman. And here's a sartorial shocker for you. Despite the constant media narrative that Mrs. Trump's dresses are haute couture, while the down-to-earth Michelle Obama gets her clothes at Target, it is really Melania who wears pret-a-porter clothing right off the rack. Mrs. Obama was known to team up with famous designers to dress for special events. Melania Trump's ability to speak 5 languages, German, French, Serbian, English, and Slovene, has been widely discussed, but perhaps her most fluent linguistic achievement is in the world of fashion, where her clothing declares her as a person who is fiercely independent, unconventional, and quite liberated. And that's my parting shot. And that's it for this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback. I'm Lisa K. Donner. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, and stop by our website, libertynation.com. Thanks for joining us. And remember, liberty, all the time and everywhere. Have a great week.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.